Hello, and welcome to Books and the World. I'm your host, Roger Smith. Books on the World is an interview show produced by the Cape Cod Writers Center and the Cape Cod Media Center. The Writers Center was established over 6 decades ago to sponsors a 4-day writers conference every summer on Cape Cod. The goal of Books in the World is to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other communications media. This show has been broadcast continuously since 1978, making it the longest running program of its kind in the United States. Today, we are delighted to welcome Robert Reece, author of Lewellyns of Vincennes. Dr. Reece is a retired clinical professor of pediatrics at Tufts University. For years, he was also the director of child protection teams at various Boston medical centers. His latest novel, a family saga, unfolds through the major events of the first half of the 20th century, including the Great War, Prohibition, the Depression, World War II, and post-war prosperity in America. Dr. Robert Reece, welcome to Books in the World.
Thank you, Roger. Nice to be here with you.
Oh, it's just great. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. 3 of your previous novels leaned heavily on the practice of medicine, so I was expecting something similar in this very fascinating book. Although there are numerous doctors portrayed in Lewellyns of Vincennes, the plot doesn't pivot on medicine. Let's start with your elevator pitch. Tell us a little bit about Lewellyns from Vincennes and what prompted you to tell this story.
Well, what prompted me was a realization that my own family had an interesting history in itself, and that is what made me decide, well, let's see if I can go back and reconstruct this family history and make it appealing to the reader. So I took a few poetic licenses, shall we say, with the telling of the story. And I had a little difficulty at the beginning knowing how to tell this story because I wasn't there. And I had to have somebody who was there at the time. So what I did is I invented a person, a twin brother to Cyrus, to Jack, who is the patriarch of this family. And that brought up a different problem, and that is, how do you do a story with first-person peripheral? So I searched around and I tried to figure out where else has this been done? Mm-hmm. Well, it was easy to find Great Gatsby. Nick Carraway, it was a first-person peripheral voice, and he tells the whole story of the Great Gatsby, and it's one of those wonderful classic novels and movies that everybody loves. I've seen every edition of the movies and loved them. So I invented Cyrus, made Cyrus the chorus, and he is the storyteller in the whole book. I tried not to make Cyrus a major character, but he kind of, at points during the story, gets drawn into the telling of the story. Many people have asked me, what was Cyrus like? He was sort of this shady figure that nobody knew very well, unmarried, works for several newspapers, and I said that's the way I wanted him to be. I didn't want him to be in the way of the storytelling.
I think that was brilliant, and he did an excellent storytelling job. So thank you for inventing him. I got to tell you, myself as a writer of historical fiction, I was very impressed by the way you got us into the time and place, and we really whipped through 6 or 7 decades of American history. So tell us a little bit about how you transported yourself there in order to be able to tell the reader that.
Well, a lot of the dialogue is invented. It had to be because I wasn't there. A lot of the stories that I tell in the book are things that happened and I listened to in family gatherings. We had a very garrulous group of people in my family. They all talked a lot. And I think that I was listening, and I remembered what they were saying. And I pieced this together, And then I had to invent certain things. Not everything I could remember actually happened probably, and some of the things that I wrote about I had to invent because they had to fill in the gaps of the storytelling. The other thing that was very helpful to me was my father had a scrapbook from World War I.
Perfect.
And he told the story pretty much about his experiences. As a matter of fact, one of the chapters is the diary that he kept.
Whoa.
And I didn't really edit it very much. I did a little here and there, but most of it is simply a transcription of what he said and the things that he complained about as a Marine in World War I. He didn't see combat, but he certainly saw a lot of the results of that combat in France in particular, where he was stationed. And all of the woes of the enlisted man were pretty well documented. Complaints about the food, complaints about the officers. He was a private, and so he had a lot of complaints about how they were being treated, the dog faces, as they used to call themselves.
Right. Well, that's terrific. Now you've got me thinking. We're talking about American vernacular now that is 100 years old. Did you have to modernize the language at all when you were doing the transcriptions?
No, most of it is, I'm a pretty old guy, and so a lot of it I was, World War II had a lot more of the vernacular in it. I can't remember the Willie and Joe characters that Pyle, I think the man was Pyle, who, the cartoonist, and so a lot of the, I read those assiduously when I was a teenager in World War II. So I really knew a lot of the jargon that was being passed around in World War II, and I think it was probably similar in World War I. I don't know that, but I think it's probably true.
Well, that's terrific. All right, now I'm going to, you've probably wrestled with the question that I'm about to ask, which is people who are in the novelizing business often talk about an inciting incident, the incident that the main character or any character's personality pivots on. And there's an inciting incident very early on in the book that really changes Jack. But here's my question. Do you think Jack's personality pivoted on this inciting incident, or do you think that Jack would have been that person no matter what?
Oh, I think it did pivot on that. I think it's absolutely the turning point in his life. Because what happens, and I don't want to give too much of it away, but I will tell you that his father dies of diabetes, which was untreatable in those days. And he was 13 years old, and he was the oldest son in the family, and he had to go to work. There was no choice. And
every anticipation was that he was going to follow in his father's footsteps.
Yeah. Well, he followed his father around like a puppy dog, and he loved the whole business of medicine. Cyrus, on the other hand, had no interest in it whatsoever and made that very clear. But Jack himself followed his father around and went on house calls with him, watched an awful lot of tragedy of kids dying of tetanus and women dying of ruptured ectopic pregnancies and that sort of thing. He was there for all of that. He fell in love with medicine. And he obviously wanted to be a doctor, so, but that was denied to him.
So here we have a bright, capable individual who was on a track to go this way, and then life dealt him a different hand. And so now, tell us about Jack's frustrations in life. Well,
he didn't even finish high school. He had to go to work, and there was no choice. His mother, with whom he had a very, very tenuous relationship, told him he had to go to work, but Cyrus didn't, because, as she put it, Cyrus doesn't know how to do anything, and you do, and which was a backhanded compliment. So he had to go to work, and then he cast around for some kind of a job as he became close to draft age, and he went to work for Goodyear Tire and Rubber, which, you know, in those days in the Midwest, Goodyear was in Akron, Ohio, and so he was aware of them and applied for a job, got it, although he was really young, much too young to be working at that job. But then he got trained in being a salesman for tires. But then the war came. And when he had to go to the war, I mean, in those days the draft was for everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody had to serve if there was a war. So he goes in the war, and right after he's in the Army or the Marine Corps, the armistice is signed. Mm-hmm. But he still has to go serve his time in the European theater. Mm-hmm. And that's what he did. So those were big blows to him personally. And then when he came back, he wasn't sure what he was going to do. And luckily, he did get rehired with mm-hmm. Goodyear. And but then they tore him out of his home
shifted him around
all over
mm-hmm.
Indiana. He had more homes in Indiana, and that was a very, very unsettling kind of life to lead. Mm-hmm. Although he was given the compliment that he was the best developer of territories, that's why they moved him around. Mm-hmm. He didn't believe that, but he didn't have any choice, and so he kept doing what the employers told him to do.
So here's a man who has been frustrated in his major goals in life, although they've probably been shelved a long time ago. Now, when you and I were exchanging emails in the run-up to this interview, we were talking very briefly about catharsis. And you said that writing this book had its own catharsis for you, mm-hmm. and I assumed that you were wrestling with a Jack character and yeah. your own relationship mm-hmm. with your father, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think all boys in particular have a relationship with their father that is multiple kinds of feelings. I was scared to death of my father because he was an alcoholic, mm-hmm. and he regularly had binges on the weekends. So I had some misgivings about my father. And so writing about him was something, as you say, a catharsis, because it was my ability to talk about something that I'd wrestled with for most of my life, and it was very, very, very liberating. Mm-hmm. I think is the best word for it. Yeah. So anyhow, at the end of the book, I was feeling much better about my father and my relationship with him.
Maybe we should all write about our fathers.
I think a lot of people do.
That's very telling, because obviously Jack is a flawed character, mm-hmm. but what I felt as though you did was allow us to understand more about how these flaws came into being, and with that understanding there was more forgiveness.
Yeah, that's right. Forgiveness is the major thing that mm-hmm. came from this book for mm-hmm. me.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk about the alcoholism for a moment. Just how was that manifested for you? How did it affect you?
Well, as I said, I was afraid of him because when he was drunk, he was a raging alcoholic, and he never hurt me, mm-hmm. never laid a hand on me that I ever can remember. Mm-hmm. But I was terrified mm-hmm. when he was drunk because mm-hmm. I didn't know what he was going to do, mm-hmm. and I can remember one instance of his staggering down a long hall we had in one of the houses, and then falling against a coat hanger, and I thought, one of these
coat rack,
mm-hmm. and I remember thinking, I wonder if he's hurt himself, and he didn't fall to the ground. But those kinds of things went on all the time. My relationship with him was pretty distant. I sort of avoided him as much as I could, and I was afraid to invite friends over to the house because there he would be in a drunken state sometimes. He was one of these weekend drunks too. He wasn't somebody who was going to drink every day. And I don't know quite how he controlled that,
Right.
but he did.
Takes many forms, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure does. Yeah.
And you really hit the trifecta because your mother was also, or at least the Jack's wife Esther in this book was a very distant, remote, undemonstrative individual.
Well, no, that's not really true. The mother, Jack's mother, was that way.
Right.
Oh, but his wife was just the opposite.
Right. I misspoke.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
talking about
Yeah,
his mom.
His mother was also, and she was preoccupied with her other son, who's also invented, by the way.
Ah, okay.
Who probably was on the spectrum. He was an unusual child. And so she was preoccupied with taking care of him,
Right.
and that may have accounted for her distance from the other two boys. But Sarah, who is Jack's wife,
Who was a
was
brilliant
very,
character.
She's just supportive all the way through all of the tribulations that he and the rest of the family went through.
Let's. I made a list of themes that that you packed into this book: jealousy, homosexuality, alcoholism, which we've talked about, family secrets, emotionally distant parents, warfare, illness, premature death, entrepreneurialism, grief, faith, music as therapy, and educated class privilege. Now, take your pick. Which one do you want to talk about?
Well,
because they're all fascinating.
You've obviously read the book.
I think that was my job,
which is appreciated. Well, I think the thing that I came out of the book thinking about was the fact that Jack, despite of all these other flaws that we've mentioned, made the sacrifice to move the family to Cincinnati, where the medical school was, for John, the oldest son, to go there. And that was the way he projected his own frustration of not becoming a doctor, making it possible for John to go to medical school.
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
and
sure
did that happen in real life to your
Yes,
family?
yes. Yeah.
Did you acknowledge it at the time as how you view it now?
No, I was 12 years old when we moved to Cincinnati. I thought, another move. Here we go again.
Here we go again. Exactly.
and Jack and my father both had no job in Cincinnati. It was for the family. So he got a job soon after he got there, but it was not a sure thing by any means. So it was a big sacrifice. And of course, Sarah went along because she goes along and did those things.
Do you, in fact, have an older sister? The Martha character?
Yes, Martha is my sister, and she did go to medical school too. Let's see. And I'm in the book too. Jimmy is who I am in the book, but and so this is really autofiction. I can't deny it. But I didn't want to make that the central idea. But the Lewellyns as a family are based on my family, but they're not the same exactly in many ways.
From what you remember of that era, did Martha encounter this kind of sexism and
oh yeah,
the resistance?
Well, this was in the 40s that she went to medical school. She was one of 3 women in the medical school class, and that was pretty unusual in itself. Before that, there almost were never any women in medical school classes, except for places like the Women's College of Philadelphia.
Right.
So her having gotten in, which, by the way, as the book states, Jack was utterly opposed to her going to medical school because he thought that that is not a profession that women should be in. It was too hard. But this is another aspect of the era. I think the context is important because this would never happen today. And in fact, medical schools are populated almost equally by men and women now. So
What a triumph that is.
yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic. Talk about how you view we talk about two world wars plus Korea. How did those factor into your narrative?
Well, the First World War is obvious because that's where Jack was, and that's where the diary came from. World War II was when my brother, who's John in the book, was in medical school, and it was a thing called the ASTP program. It was a program by the federal government. They drafted all of the medical students all over the country and made them soldiers so that they would have adequate medical care for the troops. And so all of these people were in medical school and in the Army at the same time. And they would march every day from where they were billeted on the main campus of the university over to the medical school. So this was this is what they did. And they accelerated their movement through medical school so that they would graduate in time to be of service. Of course, the war was over by the time John graduates from medical school. And then there's another thing that goes on there that is pretty important.
Absolutely. Well, we want people to read the book, so we're not going to delve too far into that. Now, the letters from Jack to Cyrus during the war, but there were also letters back and forth once they were back in the United States. Real or?
No.
No, made up.
Totally. Well, Cyrus is made up. And
of course.
So
But
everybody,
right.
all of those letters are simply transitions so that we could get on with the storytelling.
They set the stage very nicely. You teed things up, and it worked really, really well.
No, thank you.
What about the family sing-alongs?
Oh yeah. Well, this was something that really did happen. Practically every week, Sundays after church, the family would gather around the upright piano in the living room, and we would have singing of all of the popular songs of the day. As a matter of fact, all the chapter titles are songs that we used to sing. So, and when we went on trips to Indiana to visit relatives, we sang in the car, all of us.
God, we don't do that anymore, do we?
Now you turn on the radio or your iPhone or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just amazing. And did literally everybody take their own soprano, alto,
Yeah,
tenor,
and
bass?
everybody. My father was the baritone. I was a tenor always because my voice hadn't changed usually until. And then my mother, who was a singer in her own right, I mean, she was really trained to be probably a choral singer and a soloist within choruses. And she would, of course, take the soprano part. And John would take whatever part was left. And,
wow.
So we had some pretty good quartets.
Oh, isn't that grand? Good. Can you still remember the words to some of the songs?
Not very well. Some of them I do, but not many.
I won't ask you then. We won't get into that.
No.
All right. Very good. Now, there was a story that interested me, and my bet is that this actually happened. But tell me about the Wainwright kid, the kid that just showed up and almost drowned in the river.
You know, this is the early part of the book, and this is when Cyrus and Jack were young, and they were growing up in Vincennes. This is where the Vincennes comes from. And the Wabash River was there, and there was it was a sort of a muddy river, and they would go swimming there. And one day, a kid named Wainwright came, and he undressed, and they could see marks on his body. He went into the water and didn't come out for quite a long time, and they finally became aware of the fact that he was not coming out, and they went in and pulled him out, resuscitated him. Luckily, he was able to be resuscitated. And then they asked him where he was from, and he wouldn't tell them. He just walked away. Later, sometime later, he was seen by Dr. Lewellyn, Dr. Lew, as he's known in the book, and he'd been abused by his father. And so the police came and took him away to some kind of placement area, and that was very made up, though. It was.
Okay.
I wanted.
So I bet wrong.
I wanted. No, you didn't get it wrong. It just. I didn't mean it to be an actual event, but it seemed to me an appropriate thing to put into that period of time, because there was no provision made for children who were being abused in those days.
No acknowledgement that it was even a thing.
No.
All right, well, I've got one last question, and then we've got to kind of wrap up. This has been a very fast half hour. The Hoagie Carmichael story, real or made up?
That's real.
Wow. You got it. You definitely have to read about the Hoagie. And while we're there, Tennessee Ernie Ford?
That's real.
Ah, terrific. Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
This is my closing pitch here. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, you'll find links to them on our website, which is capecodwriterscenter.org, through our Facebook page and on YouTube. Thank you for watching Books in the World.